Well, while we're waiting, my thought is with the panelists, if you have access to the chat, we could start getting your thoughts and ideas flowing, and I can kick off the first question. And then you can write your response in the chat while we have the AV team running in and out, trying to make sure that we can hear your beautiful voices. So the first question that we have on our agenda, and again, we're ordered through chaos, structuring complex data sets and teams that manage them. What size should my data team be? And I know that this might vary from project to project or industry to industry. For example, a small healthcare startup versus a large financial corporation. But if you guys want to get the ideas flowing on the panel side, what size should my data team be, and how do I figure out how many I will need? So feel free to pop those into the chat. And then once we have a couple of responses, we can have myself just kind of read them out to the audience here as well. And so speakers, if you're putting it into the public channel, give me a thumbs up. If you're putting it in the session channel, give me a pointer finger. And if you're writing in the speakers channel, give me a high five. Madison, what's your thought on having them call on a phone?
Sure. I've been messaging. It looks like our AV team is trying to figure it out. I'm not sure, but yeah, if we could do a conference call via phone if that works for everyone. Apologize again for the technical difficulties.
So in the speaker channel, I just popped my number in. If any of the panelists want to give me a ring there, I can conference us in and hold the phone up to the microphone to try to get things rolling better.
Hey.
Is this Tess?
Yes, this is Tess.
Yay, we have Tess.
If you want to set it down, I can put the handle on next to it. Does that work?
Sure. If you guys want to mute your side, there we go. All right, we have 2 now. And now we have 3. Do you want to mute your side? So Madison, I can only control 2 people at a time.
Okay, I can. Just the third person want to call me?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the last person that just dialed in, Madison, you can give her a call. Who do I have right now with me?
You have Tessa?
Okay, I have Tess, and then one other. I don't hear another voice. So Tess, why don't you just give an intro of yourself?
Sure, of course. Again, hi everyone. I'm Tess Michaels. I am the founder and CEO of Stride Funding. We are a mission-driven, venture-backed fintech company. We create access to education by using alternative credit underwriting and partnering with large employers to really create a connected ecosystem. The majority of our team is primarily technical across data science, data engineering, product. So excited to share more.
Awesome. And then we have a 201 number. Who's that?
That's me, Hallie.
Oh, can you meet your side potentially?
I think it's because of the two cell phones, maybe.
Can you add this caller?
Is this working?
Can you hear me?
Yep. I think when you both have a phone.
She needs to meet her computer. There we go.
Okay. All right. We working?
I think I'm here.
Okay.
Yes, we hear you, Hallie.
I'm Hallie Bregman. I am CEO of the Bregman Group. I run a consultancy focused on helping chief people officers measure what matters when it comes to employee experience. Have a background in data science more broadly, but principles to apply today.
Awesome. And so, Michael, I'll have you ring my phone again. I couldn't merge you before because I had two on, but now I just have one since Madison has Hallie. So feel free to give my phone a ring. And while we wait on that, Hallie, why don't you kind of dig into the question that I had posed?
I think I have Michael on
Oh.
my phone.
Beautiful. Michael, are you there?
I'm here.
Awesome. Can you give an intro of yourself, please?
Sure. Hey, I'm Michael. Go by Nikki Broadbar. I'm a senior manager of data science at CrowdStrike, a leading provider of cybersecurity products. I'm local to the Boston area, veteran of a few startups in the area, such as CarGurus and Drift. Computer scientist by training, with a PhD from UPenn, focusing on developing novel data mining algorithms. It is a pleasure to be here and speak on this fun.
Awesome. I'm so glad that we could troubleshoot and figure out how to make things work on the fly. So with that, I'll pop back into the first question that I had. And this is really for individuals that are thinking about creating and starting their own data teams. And so if someone is thinking about as a startup, perhaps a seed stage founder, what size should their data team be? And how do they go about thinking about that? So Tess, I'll start off with you.
So, there's no golden ratio for the number of data folks to have on hand. It really does change as we think about the size of the company and also just the complexity that grows over time. But our personal view is, every department should have a dedicated data science and data analyst capacity. And when I say, data science, that's really the individuals who are enabling stakeholders, who are performing advanced modeling. And then the analysts are more domain experts. And so you may have someone who understands financial data versus marketing data and pairs with the data science team. And then the last layer we think of more company-wide is the data engineers, who really help with programmatic access to all data in a very secure, reliable interface. And so again, ultimately the goal is to enable the sub-teams through the data science org.
Awesome. And so with that, Hallie, why don't you kind of give your thoughts on how things work on your team?
Yeah, so having worked in a number of organizations that kind of seen it happen many different ways, I think to echo Tess, right, there's no magic ratio, right? There's no magic number. And I think a small data team can be incredibly powerful if you have the right tools at your disposal. So I do think pretty early on you want to have a data resource, right? Being able to manage data pipeline and make sure your data is, really your data architect, your data engineer who is structuring the data. But there's a lot of automation tools out there that can help with a ton of the work that is historically done manually. And so I think if you leverage that capability, then you need less on the insights and analytics side, right? I would say you don't need none. You definitely need somebody to provide human context. In addition to the AI,
Oh my gosh, I think we have you guys live.
Yep, you do. Hang on. Can you hear us live?
Yeah, I think we may have lost you.
Oh,
We
no,
actually hear you now, so it's awesome. We hear you guys up on the screen. Can you hear us?
We can hear you. Okay.
Bring up your phones. We have talk. Beautiful, amazing. Only 25 minutes in, we got it. All right, you can continue on now. Sorry about that. You're live.
Okay, Holly, I guess the sound's working.
You want me to go back to what I was saying, or
Yes,
should we
please.
Okay. Did you not hear
The end of it, we cut off.
the end of it? Okay.
End of it.
No problem. Just don't want to repeat myself. Yeah. So I think with tools and automation, there's a lot you can do with smaller teams now than historically can be done. But you really always want at least somebody on the side to be developing insights and actionable outcomes coming off of that. So I think that's an important person to get in place sooner than later, but certainly making sure that kind of the health of your data pipeline and structure probably comes first.
Awesome. And then last but not least, Mickey, give us some of your insights.
I'd say one thing that I've sort of seen over the years is that absolutely there's no magic number. The ratio can really vary depending on the type and nature of the company and how dependent it is on data. But a good indicator is sort of thinking of the ratio between or engineering to data folks, sort of thinking of the ratio in mind of sort of having allocated a portion of the engineering force proportionally to the engineering force to data. So that number can vary, but for example, a healthy number could be something like for every 3 engineers having 1 data person. Beside that, sort of also thinking what type of data functions you'd like your company to have from the get-go. Typically, I've seen it to be quite successful to sort of grow the different subdivisions in parallel, where you would think if I already, maybe I'm using the ratio of 3-to-1 for every 3 engineers, 1 data person. How many data scientists, how many data analysts, how many data engineers, how many machine learning engineers I'd like to have from the get-go. That would depend on the type of product you're developing, but roughly speaking, you want to take all of these functions into consideration and sort of grow them from the get-go.
Awesome. And so with that, kind of thinking still on the lines of new founders, new teams, building up that data science and data engineering team, how should I be delegating data management and analysis responsibilities across my team as a whole? And so with that, Hallie, why don't you kind of give some of your thoughts on that? How should I be delegating data management and analysis responsibilities across my team?
So I think this is part of cultural decision, right? And so I've worked in organizations where everyone, no matter the role, was expected to be able to, say, write some SQL queries and do some basic analysis on their own. Didn't matter your title. You didn't have to be a data analyst. You didn't have to be a data scientist, right? And that was really embedded in the culture. It meant data was widely accessible. It meant the expectation was that you were, right, as I call it, data literate. I think on the other end of the spectrum, right, there are certainly organizations where no one's expected to be data literate outside of the data team. I tend to stray away from this type of organization. I think data literacy is a necessary skill for everyone in our environment today. But I think it's really dependent on that decision about delegation. So if you have a more centralized model, right, versus a more federated model, you're going to kind of want to give out responsibilities differently. I think the things that always need to fall in the data team are the data structures, the pipeline, architecture and engineering, right? That is a specialized expertise. And especially when dealing with health data, people data, right? There's a lot of security needed around that, and that is specialized. When it comes to insights and analytics, that can be much more federated, right? Much more delegated. And again, if you have the right kind of security model in place, then you can let people really be able to derive their insights. And I think there's a lot of advantage to that.
Awesome. Tess, why don't you hop in?
Yeah, I completely agree with Hallie on the idea that when it comes to insights and analysis, the goal is to really level up your team and be able to utilize your data engineering, your product engineering teams to create the tooling for it to be queryable and for folks to be able to build the reports they need, but within the sub teams of marketing or finance and others. And some of our favorite moments have been seeing folks who are on our finance team who just knew Excel use our learning and development budget to learn SQL and to then be able to themselves really pull the reports and be able to understand the data that they're on a day-to-day basis. And ultimately, the engineering team should build a platform that is digestible so that each team feels like this is not such a big leap, but is actually something that feels intuitive on a day-to-day basis, is integrated. And so, yeah.
Awesome. And last but not least, Mickey.
Absolutely agree as well. And both the data-centric and federated approaches I've seen working great. For data-centric, you probably want to take more time in sort of hiring more a central analytics team, where in a more federated approach, this would be somewhat more embedded in the company, and there would be more emphasis on data literacy and education around how to use the data, how to leverage it across teams in an effective way. So yeah, in both ways, I think it would be important to have at least some version of data engineering, ML engineering, and data science, and then analytics can be sort of embedded or more centralized, depending on the nature of the company and the approach.
That's awesome. And I think, this is motivating for me as a founder as well. We have one data scientist, we have a team of 6, we're super small. And so this is very empowering to think that we can create that data literacy across early stage startups so that everyone feels empowered to be responsible for that data. That's really exciting. So I'll move on to the next question, and I'll start off with Mickey this time. So again, thinking through building out these teams, let's say that I want to hire someone in to help with the data. What backgrounds and expertise should my early data team have to ensure that I have the proper skill sets covered?
That's a great question. I've seen two sort of philosophies with that. Some you can sort of think of like a jack of all trades approach, where maybe I'm going to hire a few people that sort of are very capable in almost, they have a really, really good breadth of skills across both data engineering, data architecture, data analysis, data science. And a different approach altogether, we sort of from the get-go says, let's grow these functions in parallel rather than, and then hire more specialized people, a data scientist, a data analyst, and a data engineer, and an ML engineer. I think with the former would be somewhat more risky, just because you sort of think of the candidate pool of someone that can do all 4 skills together is somewhat smaller. So harder to find these hires. It's also harder to scale once you sort of grow your company, as very quickly you find out that you do need these separate entities, one for data science, one for data engineering. From my experience, I've seen that growing these functions from day one in parallel is really, really helpful and effective. You might sort of ask, data science typically need data to really be successful. But even before some data exists, data science can really help from the get-go, understanding what data we can create, what vendors we can work with, start seeing it in initial data, while data engineering is developing the first pipelines and really informing them. So in a way, growing all the 4 different sub teams at the same time is really helpful and really helps scale really quickly, and would be more of what I've seen and recommend more.
Awesome. And do either of you ladies have any insight on this building of a team?
One piece I would add here is, first of all, I think when we hear team, we always assume everything has to be your full-time team. And I think there are phases for a company where we really thought about where we did need experts around security and other aspects, but we, at the early stages of Stride, we're too early at this point in time to have a full-time A+ security person. And so therefore, let's be thoughtful on finding the best in the market in a fractional capacity. And I think, that's definitely a way to think about phasing, where, as Michael shared, you don't always want generalists who are just okay at all the things. You actually do want to set your business up to scale. And then the second thing is, culturally, I'd really focus on building in, a culture around documentation, because whoever is in your org as that evolves, you want to really ingrain that. You want to understand the why things are created as they did, what sources are being used. And so that as you grow the team, it's that much easier to scale, regardless of the hire and their specialty.
I'll also just add, I think when it comes to the skills you're looking for, so we've kind of talked about the different roles to hire for, but especially when it comes to something like data science, I think back to 10 years ago when there was no data scientist degree, right? And so you had people with degrees in computer science and physics, and my degrees in psychology, right? Like, it was a very much of a melting pot of backgrounds. And I think that really brings something to the table in terms of diversity of thought. Everybody kind of had different experiences and methodology. So today you will find more structured degrees, but I always say, don't be afraid to kind of, look outside the box and find folks who have different experiences. There's a lot of different, I think data science is known for hiring PhDs. I don't always think that is necessary, but there's a lot of different PhD programs that have really rigorous analytics training and capability. And then there's programs like Insight that take, folks out of academia and put them through training to move into industry, right? Those are some great skill sets to be able to hire into these types of roles. So.
Yeah, and our startup actually worked with Insight multiple times, getting in. These are academics who are looking to transition into the data science world, and they do an internship with you, working in your data set. And so you give them a problem or a goal that they have to solve for that particular program timeframe. So that is a great plug for that group as well, if you're looking for early talent that is just starting to open up into the data world. And so I think, from all of these insights in terms of hiring, this kind of really pushes the next question, which is, and Tess touched on it a little bit as well during her answer, but how can one ensure they are building a scalable data architecture within an ever-growing company? And so with that, Mickey, why don't you kick it off?
Sure. Let's see. So a lot of things change typically with sort of the way company is evolving. I'd say as company becomes more AI centric, this need for different ways to think about data management really changes. One of the main reasons for that is the type of data that AI systems are built upon. You typically have a lot of unstructured data and sort of perhaps different from more tabular data, where there's more expertly insight into the different conventions and semantics of different fields. So you start very quickly needing to have systems that can extract and classify that kind of data, can deploy that kind of data, and really importantly, at the same time, deal with the cybersecurity complexities that come with the data. For example, is there PII? Is there sensitive data that perhaps it's easier to identify in tabular data, as we know, certain fields are PII or sensitive, whereas with unstructured data, this becomes much more prevalent. The good news, though, I think with that, there's sort of two ways you can go about this. Typically, if you sort of hire a data engineer that has interest in data architecture, you can have that person in somewhat of a dual mandate or a dual role, where they also think how to set up these programs, how to set these systems to begin with, to sort of take these things into consideration. And I think the second thing that really helps with that, and as your company becomes more AI driven, is that AI itself is really helping AI data architecture, in the sense that you can do a lot of these things with systems that are fully tailored to extract data, classify data, that are built on AI. So there are vendors, there are tools you can leverage for this.
Awesome. And I know, Tess, you had mentioned thinking about scaling teams, whether you want a fractional individual versus not. So if you want to take it from here and kind of talk about your idea on scaling architecture and team.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think the key is just having everything really be structured, right? Regardless of who the team is composition-wise. As I mentioned, it's really important to have data dictionaries to make sure that everyone's speaking the same language, and to also do enough assessments to make sure your broader team knows where to find data, how to utilize it. For example, we at Stride, we always assess ourselves using, there's this University of Chicago data maturity assessment. And we basically send these surveys to every stakeholder within Stride, broken up by the teams, to understand, can you find this data and how do you use this data? Put simply. And then we also do checks, even with the data dictionaries, on, even the format of how it's written, where it's written, and which teams are able to digest it, right? And so ultimately, like, create your own protocols and kind of philosophies around it, and then stick to it as the team grows. So.
It's also, like, tech debt is everybody's nightmare, right? You get to be like a 5 or a 10-year-old company, and you're like, oh my God, we designed this all wrong on day one, and we haven't even thought about changing it since then. We've just been operating. And I think recognizing that while tech debt is everyone's nightmare, you can't get it all right on day one, right? Like, you can only design for what you know right then, or what you anticipate and what you project, but things changed, right? AI, ChatGPT wasn't around 2 years ago. Now we're all, up in arms about that, right? Like, everything changes. And so I think having some kind of like quarterly audit process where you're able to go in and evaluate, is this still the right structure? Are there small changes we can make that will, move us in the right direction, as opposed to waiting 10 years to overhaul the entire thing? Like, just like we use Agile for product development, we need to apply that same principle in terms of data structure and pipeline, because there's just so much change. And I've been part of many organizations where you go back and you're like, there's no data dictionary, there's no documentation, nobody knows what the things are. And the system is no longer working in the way that I need it to at this scale, as opposed to at an earlier scale. So definitely something to consider.
Wonderful. Yeah, having a data dictionary seems like a way where I could have, team members that are on the medical side that don't usually touch data become that data literate that you talked about. So that's really exciting. So the next question, again, now we're thinking about scalability. How can the greater organization support data integrity and responsibility for all employees? And so with that, Hallie, why don't you kick us off into thinking, the greater organization supporting that data integrity? And honestly, a lot of what you guys have said probably builds up directly to this question, but I'll let you kind of bring it home.
Yeah. So in the space I work in, right, I work in HR essentially, right? So I work with employee data. And that is, right, integrity, ethics, absolutely critical to using this type of data. And so I think just simply about, like, Remember when you used to send a spreadsheet and it had to be password protected? And how many times have folks sent spreadsheets without a password, right? Now there's more sophisticated ways, right? I'm a big fan of even just as simple as Google Sheets, where you can share it directly with a person and you don't have to transmit it over email. But there are, increasingly more secure ways to manage this. And, in my space, we build ethics charters. We build, models from the get-go where you say, this is how we should use this data. This is what we're responsible for. And this is what constitutes misuse of this data, right? And, again, in my space, we're under very strict, law, GDPR, for instance, in Europe, right? Like we have incredible regulation around what we can and can't do with employee data. But knowing that up front and being very explicit about what that means really helps in the long term.
Awesome. Do either of you want to add to that in terms of how you've seen data integrity play out in your organizations?
Sure. Yeah, so sort of thinking about the data integrity space, I'm kind of thinking about three separate aspects of it. The accuracy, when data is returned, is the data collection method going to provide correct information? Completeness, can I ensure no data will be missing if I collect in this way? And then extensiveness of the approach. Is the data collected cover my needs, use cases? Is it all encompassing? So really fostering a culture of employee training and sort of integrated into the everyday operations. I think it's something that can greatly help, sort of delegating some of the responsibilities around accuracy and completeness to these teams that entering this data and make sure they're feeling very comfortable in that process. That's going to pay high dividends for the company. So perhaps good examples would be customer-facing teams like sales, marketing, or customer success. For example, customer success team would create Jira tickets with information about interaction with customers, making sure we're creating all the fields that would bring us the complete information, and also put guardrails so we do have accurate information coming in. And I feel like these kind of things can really help with that. And pretty much another side that perhaps is not spoken about enough about the culture of data integrity is sort of thinking how you increase data literacy across the company altogether. If you sort of think about some of the functions of the data team is, at least for the analytics side of it, is creating dashboards and other data products that are used across the company, making sure that people are using this extensively and know how to read and ingest information, draw inferences from them. Many times they'll come back with questions or needs that would really help us understand that perhaps the data is not accurate, is not complete, or is not extensive enough. So having foster a culture of data literacy would really help with data integrity as well.
Wonderful. And so, one of you actually touched on ChatGPT a little bit in passing, but I'm curious your thoughts on, with the launch of OpenAI's ChatGPT Enterprise, how do you prepare your data for generative AI and how that can all interact? So with that, Mickey, why don't I kick off with you? We ended with you when the last one. We'll start with you on this one. How do you think that you can prepare your data for generative AI?
Yeah, excellent question. So sort of thinking about the usage of LLMs, right? There are different ways you could sort of benefit, and especially ChatGPT. There's sort of the, you train a complete model yourself, or you start with a pre-trained model and sort of adjust it, or use more prompt engineering. These are like the three main approaches that folks have been using for the LLM space. Things that really help with really getting the most value out of LLMs is ensuring data integrity. Generative AI relies heavily on data, that it can generate extensive inferences from. So as long as we have accurate, complete, and extensive data, it really helps getting the most value from generative AI. Improving data availability, the more diverse textual data is better. AI applications are really good in identifying synergies among different data sources. So for example, maybe you have emails that you use for that, but not customer interaction records or maybe contracts. Any complementary data sources can greatly benefit from really putting ChatGPT or making the best usage of LLMs and ChatGPT specifically. And perhaps one other aspect that sometimes is not being discussed enough is making sure that you have enough rich metadata when you train these systems. It would greatly help ChatGPT and other LLM solutions. So for example, hashtags, classification tags, labels that you have maybe from interactions with customers would greatly help getting the most benefit from these systems.
Awesome. And do either of you have any additional insights you'd like to add in?
Just a quick story. And I think, Mickey's quite right. Like, as many data sources, right, the better you train the model, the better the model is. So ChatGPT, right, came out and we're all so excited and everybody's using it. And I think this is where I always say, like, take it with a grain of salt, right? This is why you can't do AI without a human to kind of balance it, right, and provide. There was someone who did a small research study who asked ChatGPT to write job descriptions. And they said, hey, write a job description for a software engineer. And ChatGPT immediately said, he. It gendered the prompt without the person put right. And so I think of stories like that when it comes to data integrity and how good, no matter how good your data might be, when you train that model, if there is any nuance of anything that is embedded in it that might be wrong, ChatGPT is going to leverage that. And so taking it all, I think it adds great efficiencies and offers great insights that we wouldn't always have access to, but taking it with a grain of salt, for sure.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point, Hallie. I would also just add the implications also depend on the sector that you're playing in. So at Stride, we're in the fintech space. We specifically right now also do underwriting for students. And similar to how Hallie talked about, the people organization within a company is one of the most sensitive with the data you touch. Similarly, we are very wary of what types of unstructured data we would utilize because there is so much compliance and regulatory rigor on the data that we are receiving. And so ultimately, we have our own AI manifesto at Stride of like what are the applications that are simple and basic, but we may be slower on the spectrum, right? Because on specific use cases, because you need to be sure that everything is secure and done right, and you don't have biases built in, as Hallie mentioned. And so again, another piece to think about.
So we are coming close to a close. We're about 8 minutes left. I figured I would end the panel with questions to the audience, but right before that, if I could have each of the panelists give a quick few words of lessons learned. So if someone were to pose to you the question, if I could go back in time and talk to myself just as I'm launching a new team or a new data architecture, what would I have done differently, or what would I tell myself now to ensure that I'm on the right path? So Tess, I'll have you kick off quick.
Yeah. So one piece that, I've really appreciated over time is realizing as the business scales, how your own data becomes valuable as we're thinking about growth. And for us, you solve for short, like flywheel effects, right? So for us, if we know that we play across degree programs and non-degree programs, and non-degree programs are a bit shorter in duration, I can learn a lot in a very short period of time. The one thing you can't speed up is time. And so thinking about ways that are call it unique to be able to access data that is proprietary that you can then learn from, but also realizing that you need a certain amount of scale for it to also be statistically relevant, right? And not being biased by the fact that just because it's what you've collected, it's the most pure or the best, is something that stepping back, I think, is a good learning as any of us think about building a business. So.
Yeah, how about you, Hallie?
Say don't be a hero. You may be able to build a really sophisticated architecture, but don't try to do it alone. You may have be able to outline it and build it, but go bounce it off a few other people, right? Other people who get data and other people who don't get data, right? Because I think getting outside perspective and that critical thinking capability to think about checks and balances, don't try to go it alone.
And Mickey?
Yeah, one thing I'd say, probably think about scaling from the get-go, although it's sort of easier early on to sort of solve for the needs of the company at that point, or maybe very, very shortly after. It really helps when, especially with the data function, sort of thinking in advance how we might be able to scale it better. It would save you a lot of pain later on, and sort of allows you to accelerate much quicker once you're growing and sort of moving through funding stages.
Wonderful. And so with that, I'd love to open it up for any questions. Are there any in-person questions that we have here, or ones that we could find in the chat?
Hello to the whole panel. This was a very insightful session. Thank you so much. My question is to all of you. I'm sure all of you have experience with a lot of new talent. And I'm somebody who is going to be starting into this profession of data. What would you be looking forward in a employee, as in somebody who has covered all their bases? They're into data architecture, also has interest in data engineering and analytics, or somebody who is more into, like me, more into data analytics with an inclination towards understanding data engineering as well.
So I'll kick it off. I think that, first of all, it's great that you're moving into the space. And I think half the battle is looking for talent that's just hungry. Earlier, we talked about how, what's really special, I think, for a lot of companies is to watch their team members upskill and proactively find ways to honestly like soak in all of that knowledge and learn. As Michael had said earlier, you don't have to just be great at everything. I would also figure out early on, what do you want to be, not necessarily like the best at in the room, right? Like the go-to person for, and how do you get deep in that, but also be dangerous enough that you can talk with all the other data teams within the org, right? And so if you just come in with the right spirit and put in the work, and then look outside for the right tools to learn from, I think that you're right on your way, and being at this conference is a good step in the right direction there. So.
Any other questions from the audience here or within the public chat? No more in here. All right. Well, we're coming close to 3 o'clock. So I want to thank all the panelists here with a round of applause for all their wonderful insights into data.